last time at our last cluster meeting back in September, I did a presentation still under the Teal Vision Pod about wholeness. And today, there are 3 pillars under this Teal organizational model. And today I'm going to dive into the pillar of evolutionary purpose. So that's a bit interesting. So I'm just having a little, yeah.
Will I change the slide?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. All right. Yeah, next slide. So Teal organizational theory. At its core, Teal theory has 3 central pillars, which align closely to our work as homeopaths. And they are wholeness, which I spoke about last time, evolutionary purpose, which was today's topic, and self-organization, which is the next topic early next year. So evolutionary purpose, first of all, in this presentation, we'll talk about the definition, and then also how we may already be familiar with this concept and how it can be applied in relation to working together in research pods. All right. So just in general, one of the many facets of this theory that appealed to us were these 3 pillars. They resonate with the philosophy of homeopathy and how we relate to our patients. So there is already an alignment there. Sorry, I've just lost my place. There's already an alignment to these values as we are in the business of helping people return to their health and wholeness in a deliberate and conscious way, which is the purposefulness that engages a person to participate in their healing, another form of self-organizing. For example, if a patient wants to get well, it isn't enough to drip feed Nux vomica every day and for them to continue behaving as they were. This guidance from Hahnemann in aphorisms 5 and 7 requires that the maintaining cause be identified and wherever possible addressed. As homeopaths, we ask our patients to participate and take responsibility for their own healing and recovery, which is an example of purposefulness. For example, to cut down the coffee, the alcohol, the drugs, or the eating out, which is an example of self-organizing. We point them towards greater awareness of healthy and unhealthy choices and support them to address changes that bring them back into balance and health, an example of wholeness. So we see from this simple scenario that there are elements of these 3 pillars already embedded in our regular practices of being a homeopath. Next slide. Thanks, Celeste. So evolutionary purpose, what is it? This quote is from Frederick Laloux, who's the author and the creator of the Teal organizational theory. Evolutionary purpose is not about having a clear purpose or mission statement. It is a much more profound shift in perspective. It asks us to truly see the organization as a living entity with its own energy and its own sense of direction. And it invites us, therefore, to stop trying to predict and control the future, but to instead continuously listen and respond to the organization's purpose. This aspect of continuously sensing and responding to the organization's purpose is in contrast to the usual command and control approach used in many research teams and other organizations. Ideally, every member of the pod is alerted to the evolutionary purpose of the pod. It's not just 1 or 2 people's responsibility to be maintaining that. For example, in a typical team or organization, a final decision might usually be made by a team leader or a director. In a Teal research pod, decisions are made by everyone in a dynamic and constantly evolving process. Next slide, thank you. In Teal, the author Frederick Laloux speaks about this aspect of purposefulness. So with the example of the nux vomica case used earlier in the presentation, if the values of the patient are to keep drinking and drugging and to just keep managing it with plenty of nux vomica, then that is not in alignment with the evolutionary purpose of the healing trajectory of that patient. So another example would be from the side of the homeopath. For example, if the homeopath directs a patient to keep taking allium cepa for hay fever every spring, instead of exploring the underlying state and affecting deeper healing, this is an example where the homeopath's value does not align with the healing trajectory of the patient. Next slide. All right, understanding evolutionary purpose within the context of the research pod. How is purposefulness useful to the pod and its work? This pillar defines the relationships within the pod and speaks to the shared values between pod members. It also informs the direction and choice of the research content. And the pod itself aligns with the overall value of the Aurum project and contributes to the Aurum project's evolutionary purpose. So in a nutshell, the essence of evolutionary purposefulness is to be able to sense and respond to and within the research pod, as opposed to commanding and controlling. What does this look like actually? And for this example, I'll hand over to Celeste.
Yeah. So we had an example in the UTI pod that kind of demonstrates how purposefulness evolves or can be seen or noted by all of the pod members. So we had at the beginning of the project and early on, we defined kind of the boundaries of what the project was going to look at. And there was a lot of focus on measurement of urinary tract infection, collecting data, structure, this kind of thing. And then one of the pod members brought to the pod a research paper that they'd found really highlighting the importance of the mental and emotional state of the patient in the urinary tract infection condition, pathology. And that was kind of like a spark that ignited a resonance in many of the pod members at that time. And if you like, the pod members came together to realize that they needed to shift the boundary that they'd set so that the research could encapsulate this mental and emotional state, which as homeopaths really strongly resonated with nearly everyone in the pod. There was one pod member, though, who didn't want to change the boundaries, who was very happy with the initial idea and didn't really feel comfortable or expressed disagreement with the idea of expanding the direction in this way. And in a funny way, when we're talking about evolutionary purpose, because it's such a dynamic and fluid kind of a concept, it's something which does happen and evolve as we are engaged in something with each other. We had the situation where this particular pod member actually literally couldn't connect in to the meetings. We could go all sort of new agey and say some sort of cosmic interference happened or what have you. But it sort of led to a decision for that pod member to leave the group, which was accepted by all of the members. And in that process, what happened as well is that the pod itself, its energy changed, its capacity to engage in the project shifted. And we've seen this by the output of the pod has increased, and the activities that the pod is doing have increased, and the length of time and the recognition of what would be required for contribution in the pod changed, and more activity has been happening in that pod since that shift happened. And so we sort of like looking at that as a sign or an indication of how the evolutionary purpose is being expressed, say, within a research pod. So hopefully that kind of gives you a bit of a picture of what we're trying to explain. Does that kind of cover it, Sonny?
Yeah. No, I think that was a good example, Celeste. Yeah, and especially that, what we're trying to indicate is that sense of the pod itself is like a living organism, and so the idea to kind of sense and respond where it's at, where it wants to go, where the group sort of psyche wants to go, is different to having some rules, and there's a place for that, but the command and control aspect. And I think yeah, this evolutionary purpose that each member and the pod as a whole brings to the table as well. So yeah, that's pretty much the end of our presentation. And the next one, which I think will be in February, we'll talk about that last pillar, which is the principle of self-organization.